Tariff. It happened that on a rather cold January day, Will and Robert were making cigarette deliveries. They got out of the truck on King Street and grabbed their smokes from the back of the pickup. Robert liked to go on the cigarette run once in a while if he caught Will early in the morning having breakfast at the Dolphin. Polsky had been gone for weeks and weeks. Then he just appeared again. He'd bought himself some new clothes. Life was a little easier for him with the money Cobb and Will gave him. When they got in the store, Mr. Chow was behind the cash register. It was always either him or his wife. He was a nice guy from somewhere near Mongolia. He had raised 3 kids in Canada. He didn't really need to work anymore. He spoke a lot about selling his convenience store, but there was little chance that was going to happen. He couldn't think of anything else to do with his time. Going back to China was on his mind, but then he'd have a legion of relatives knocking on his door with money requests. The place he came from was quite poor, not one of China's special economic zones. Will noticed right away that there was something wrong. Mr. Chow had a worried and apprehensive look about him. Before Will could inquire, though, a huge man came out of one of the aisles of the convenience store. He had a long brown beard and long brown hair. Will guessed he was close to 300 pounds. He had a leather jacket on, and there were tattoos on his neck. "You the cigarette guy?" he asked, walking right up to Will and towering over him. "Pardon?" Will said. The man lifted his arm and poked Will in the chest with a big forefinger. "I said, are you the cigarette guy?" "Who's asking?" Will said. The man leaned down and whispered into Will's ear. "Oh," Will said, and his face lost all its color. "We want a piece," the man said. "Protection." "Well, I'm not really the boss," Will said. The man backhanded Will, and Will flew into the counter in front of Mr. Chow. No, Mr. Chow said. "No violence in the store." The man walked over and picked Will up with one hand and started to drag him out of the store. Before he could get to the front door, though, he collapsed to the ground, a red liquid all over the cheaply tiled floor around him. Robert Polsky was standing behind the man's unconscious form, with another glass jar of ragu spaghetti sauce cocked and ready to go, just in case the first didn't do the job. "Jesus, Robert," Will said. "You gotta go now," Chow said. Will bent down and fished the man's wallet out. He took a motorcycle license from the wallet and left with Robert, after Mr. Chow paid for his cigarettes. They got into the truck and drove away, not knowing how long the man in Mr. Chow's store would be unconscious. "Thanks, Robert," Will said as he dialed Cobb's cell phone. Robert smiled and nodded his head. Cobb answered on the 4th ring. "Yeah, Cobb, Will, big trouble. Robert knocked out not on the phone," Cobb said, and he told Will where he was and to come and get him. A short while later, Will pulled to the side of the road and Cobb came out of a Vietnamese acrylic nail and cosmetic shop. He opened the door and a burst of cold air chilled Will and Robert. He squeezed into the cab of the truck and Will drove away. Will explained as he drove. Cobb said nothing. When Will was finished, he said, Robert, we have to drop you off at the hotel now. Don't come out until we come and get you. It might take until tomorrow." "Okay," Robert said. They dropped Robert off and then drove out of the city a few hours to a reserve north of Toronto. Cobb got out of the truck and told Will to wait. 15 minutes passed before the back of the truck opened and Cobb put 2 pit bulls into the cap bed of the truck. They immediately ran to the front of the truck and rammed their heads against the glass in an attempt to get at Will. Cobb slid back into the cab of the truck and told Will to drive back to the city. The dogs settled down once Cobb spoke to them. Will drove off the reserve and back onto the highway. They drove in silence for a while, then Will said, "What's the plan?" Cobb stroked his smooth chin. What would an economist do? "It's clearly a trade dispute," Will said. "They want a tariff." "A tariff?" "Yeah," Will said. "The modern economy is doing away with tariffs. That's what free trade is all about. This is some straight-up King of France shit. It's an open market. We don't owe them anything." "They're selling protection," Cobb said. "Protection? From what?" Will asked. "From them," Cobb said. "Well, what are we going to do?" "I have to make a few calls," Cobb said. And he did just that. He made a half-dozen phone calls within an hour and then he spoke. "Guy wasn't patched. He's just a prospect. I gotta go for a sit-down." "A sit-down? What's that?" "I go, I sit, I talk. It's a negotiation," Cobb said. "Are we gonna give them a percentage?" "No fucking way," Cobb said. And the dogs growled, sensing the agitation in Cobb's voice. Cobb slammed his hand against the glass and the dogs yelped and ran to the back of the truck. "Do I have to go in?" Will asked. "Nope," Cobb said. "I go in alone." Cobb looked out the window into the dark woods beside the highway. "Tariffs, eh?" Will was a little nervous, so he started talking non-stop. He told Cobb that tariffs were everywhere in human history, that economics had to reflect human nature, despite ideals and intentions. The Silk Road to China was lined with brigands and cutthroats. The American Revolution was about tariffs imposed through mercantilism. The English had perfected the duplicitous art of trading early on in the near-modern age. Will told Cobb that when they ran out of gold, they traded opium for tea and strung out a good portion of China, because the English loved their tea. Will worked his way to the near present and explained hemispheric trading and regional trading to Cobb, telling Cobb about the softwood lumber disputes between Canada and the US. And then he just kept going. He told Cobb his theories on original sin and karma, the debt a person is born under, and how even that seemed evidence of an economy run by God. And finally, as Cobb directed Will to their destination, a concrete fortified bungalow with bars on its windows in the southeast end of the city, Will talked about prison and madness as the two final and most extreme forms of tariff, one leaving a person behind bars, and the other leaving a person medicated, shocked, or in a straitjacket. Protection from themselves, Cobb said. I guess, Will said, and he put the truck in park a half block from the bungalow and left the engine idling to keep the heat coming into the cab of the truck. Have you come to understand your vision yet? Cobb asked. No, Will said. Cobb opened the glove box and took out a piece of paper and a pen. He wrote a phone number and a name, Tom Tom. If I don't come out in 15 minutes, call this number. Will nodded his head and said nothing. Cobb reached under the passenger seat of the truck cab and pulled out a short wood-handled hatchet, which he tucked into the back of his pants, under his jacket. He nodded once at Will and got out of the truck. Will watched him walk to the door, setting off motion-sensitive floodlights in front of the bungalow. He knocked, an eye-level hatch slid back in the metal door, then it opened. Cobb went into the house. The door closed behind him. A terrible fear set itself in William Toad. His stomach felt like there was a large rat crawling around inside of it. His head felt like there was a fireworks show going on, just noise and emotion exploding everywhere. His leg was bouncing up and down uncontrollably. He looked like an addict in withdrawal. He turned on the radio. He picked up Cobb's cell phone. He dialed a long-distance number. The dashboard clock said that Cobb had been in the house 6 minutes. The telephone rang. A man answered. Hello? Dad? Will? Yeah. What the hell's going on, Will? You disappear without a word? Your sister thinks you've had some kind of a break. Dad, your mother's been worried sick. Dad, and what about school? Did we discuss a sabbatical? You're not on your own here, Will. We've invested a lot of time and money in... Dad! What? I love you, Dad. Will, is everything all right? Everything is fine, Dad. I'll be back to school next year. Well, what's this all about, Will? I just need some time off. I want you to call back and say hello to your mother. She's not in right now. I'll call tomorrow. You're sure everything is all right? Couldn't be better, Dad. Why don't you come home, spend some time with us? I have a business to run. Bye, Dad. Will ended the phone call. Cobb had been in the house 8 minutes. In another 7 minutes, he would have to make another phone call. Then a tribe of Mohawks would descend on the city with a pinpoint precision, unleashing centuries of pent-up warrior culture. How did it all come to this, he wondered. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He started to pray. He moved his lips and nodded his head slightly. This went on until the passenger door to the truck pulled open, and Cobb poked his head into the cab. It's all good, he said. I'll be back in 5 minutes. He closed the door and went to the back of the truck. He took the dogs out and walked back to the front of the house. The door opened again, and again Cobb disappeared into the house. The clock on the dashboard said that 14 minutes had passed. Cobb came out almost immediately, but without the dogs. He walked briskly to the truck and opened the passenger door and got into the cab of the truck. I smoked the peace pipe with them. Will put the truck in drive and pulled away from the side of the road. Where are the dogs? 2 dogs, a box of smokes, and an ounce of weed. I thought we weren't going to put up with any of this King of France shit. Wasn't a tariff, it was a settlement. They wanted Polsky. What did you tell them? I told them Polsky's crazy. What did they say? They said they weren't afraid of crazy. Then I told them, no, he's really crazy. He's diagnosed with schizophrenia and he sees a social worker once a week. That was enough? Every tribe has a primitive respect for the insane. Where to, Will asked. Let's go to the Gladstone and let Robert know everything is okay. Will drove them to the Gladstone Hotel. He parked in the rear and they walked through the front lobby. Jimmy at the front desk said that he hadn't seen Robert all day. Will and Cobb went up to his room on the 4th floor. There was nobody there. End of chapter.